someone says, well, they still have their annual banquet in the Tiptoe Inn on Broadway. You go up there, have some chicken and green peas and chicken soup. That sounds good to me. So I went to the Tiptoe Inn that year, 1963. I felt a little awkward because here I was, a square-looking fellow wearing a suit and a tie with a briefcase, looking like any other FBI agent, perhaps. How will they trust me? Would they talk to me? You know, these were militants, revolutionaries. What sort of people are there? And I entered this room where they were making speeches and there were songs, and they saw me come in. And I was absolutely enthralled by these people. And 15 years later, my opinion hasn't changed, not one whit.
I'm a man of peace, and that's why I'm an anarchist. It may sound very, very contradictory, but this is the fact. Anarchism is a peace movement.
I think my ideas were all my life. It wasn't that I had to read about it, but I was naturally believing in freedom and not to impose and not to dictate anybody.
Everybody was molding a little bit the younger generation, and that's how it became with that. I was never a communist, and I was never anything else but an anarchist.
Eiland, du Grenetz von Freiland, wie grausam, wie schrecklich du bist. A selche Retziches, das kennen nur Riches, du plockst die Geplockte siehst. Mit Zorres gekommen, dem Jam durchgeschwommen, die Götten von Freiheit der Sehn. Und kommt alles Eiland, du Grenetz von Freiland, und sagt halt, man kann weiter nicht gehen.
The Jews who had come out of Eastern Europe or who were still living in Europe were not only a religious group, but were a nation. And they were treated as a nationality group with a lot of prejudice against them, but treated as a nationality group. And the Jews, like Frenchmen or Germans or Italians or Spaniards, became anarchists. A certain number of them did, so that they were known as Jewish anarchists, just as there are Spanish anarchists or Italian anarchists, but not because they were religious anarchists.
I come from a Hasidic family, and I was a believer in the Jewish religion, in the very strict Orthodox religion. But I had my doubts, apparently, since my early childhood. And when I finally freed myself of the religious dogma, I still remained a Jew. I still consider myself as a Jew, but a secular Jew. And I consider myself an anarchist because I believe in the attainability of a system of society without government.
Anarchism in the 1880s and 1890s was probably the largest radical movement among the Jewish immigrants. These immigrants actually were upset by the world that confronted them when they arrived in the United States. They were disappointed. For some, of course, it's the legendary streets paved with gold, which they failed to find. I don't think any of the anarchist working men were anticipating anything like that. But they could not foresee the wrenching experience that they underwent from one world to the other. Oscar Handlin, the Harvard historian, wrote a famous book called The Uprooted. And they were uprooted from one land, one culture, one world, and cast into another world where conditions of labor were, if anything, worse than they had found, and more rigorous and more demanding than they had been in the old country. And the sweatshops were no better than the factories in Lodz or Bialystok, for example, from which many of them had come. And they were revolted by the entire ethic of capitalism that they found here in the United States, in New York, in Baltimore, and Boston, Philadelphia, and other large cities where they tended to settle, in addition to the Lower East Side. So what they did was to replace this world with a counter-world, American culture with a counterculture, and they began to establish their whole anarchist culture, an anarchist milieu.
On July the 4th, 1890, they started with the freie Arbeiterstimme. The paper, from its very inception, was an economic paper, an anarchist paper, spreading the ideas of a society without government, without coercion, without force, without wars. The immediate task of forming unions to help to relieve the economic situation of this sweatshop worker, and at the same time helping develop Yiddish culture, Yiddish theater, Yiddish poetry, Yiddish literature. And it went on like this till the end of 1977. After 87.5 years, the freie Arbeiterstimme had to cease publication.
Now here is the guy that we were waiting for. So this is our secretary. Let me introduce him first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why doesn't he come out?
Come here. Because, you know,
I don't want to be a secretary.
No.
I never see anarchists, you know, who like
Now, wait a
titles,
minute.
you know.
We are in a hurry. They may shut off the electricity from now between 3 o'clock.
They will.
Yeah, anytime.
So what
Okay.
purpose is all
He is
this?
the secretary of the managing committee of the freie Arbeiterstimme. Now, aside from this, he is a retired master mariner. He helped us win the Second World War by convoying help and material in ships to Murmansk. He also did another
Who's
thing.
got a cigarette?
He,
Nobody has a blood.
no, he also helped break through the British blockade around Palestine and smuggle illegal immigrants to Israel. Now tell him.
Palestine. There was no Israel there. There was Palestine.
Well, actually, we're here filming the closing in the freie Arbeiterstimme. So we were talking about its early days. I was wondering what's the circulation now as compared to when
I
it
don't
first
know
went.
exactly what the circulation is.
Don't you read the freie Arbeiterstimme? It's 1700. The last circulation was 1700.
Yeah.
By the way, you have these points there in the, oh, you want it here. Yeah, it's 1700. But it was not sufficient enough because we only charged $7 a year. And the expenses for printing and mailing are twice as much. And we couldn't charge more because many of our readers couldn't afford to pay more. So this is the reason
My
why...
observation is this, you know, there was all kinds of libertarian, there were anarchist publications, Italian, Spanish, other languages. But they gave up, you know, they gave up the shit. The Jews are a stubborn lot, you know. So they kept it going, you know, now finally the language is passing away, so they have. That's my observation. I think I'm right.
It's a sad day for you?
Huh?
This is a sad day for you, the closing?
It's not a sad day, you know. You look at all these books, you know, how idealistic they were to put the books out, the gospel, what you might call, you know. And it's a different age you live in.
You think? Are those ideas still, still important to you? Do you think
These
there's
ideas
realistic as when you...
Those ideas have been going on God knows how long, you know. Don't take me to say God knows that I believe there is a big boss with long beard and sidelocks, you know. What do you want from me?
Don't walk because she has to walk away from you.
But are you still as idealistic as you were when you first read the freie Arbeiterstimme?
You have to be idealistic, otherwise you might as well take a gun and blow your brains out, you know.
Nicht such mich, wo die Myrten grünen, gefindest mich dort nicht, mein Schatz. Die Lebenswelten bei Maschinen, dort ist ein Ruheplatz, dort ist dem Schatz, als Klaff bin ich, wie Keiten klingen, dort ist mein Ruheplatz, dort ist mein
Wait a minute.
That's all right. That's
You
a
were
good
working
start.
already.
That's a good start. That was
You're
very
not supposed to work so early. It's not 12 o'clock yet.
Where's old man?
He didn't feel well. He was ready to go, and in the last minute he says, I don't feel well.
He sounded sort
You know,
of
wouldn't
lovely when I called him.
And Paul Average is going to be here before 1 o'clock. He couldn't make it earlier. So we'll have to wait a little for him.
The Jewish anarchists, besides starting the freie Arbeiterstimme, were very much interested in other things. They were very much for cooperatives, for building cooperatives, for the unions. They were very active in the unions. The first anarchists that I believe were leaders of the leaders. As a matter of fact, we had even one that was the president, who was of the ILGW, who was an anarchist. And therefore, we were able to exist because we were interested in labor unions, we were interested in cooperatives, and we were very active there.
And we expressing ourselves in the freie Arbeiterstimme was our paper that we could propagate with it. That's what the important thing is, why. And naturally, if I could sell the paper, it was propaganda.
My early youth, I hung on the fringe of the communists, and when I saw a few of their deals personally, I said, not for me. And then through another friend, I came to these people, and I was with them all the time, ever since, and that was in my 20s. I've been with them a good 50 years. Their philosophy, their thinking, their dealing one with the other, their concern for each other. There's at least a little thread of humanity, not for the purpose of what's dictated from above.
Anarchism is a philosophy which rejects all forms of government. It's the only radical movement, communism, socialism, although the communists and socialists ultimately also reject government, but it's the only radical movement which wants to get rid of the government right now. Freedom now is an anarchistic slogan, to abolish the state. The anarchists see the state and the church as the twin evils of oppression in modern society. In addition to opposing the state and wanting to abolish or do away with the state, all anarchists believe in a decentralized form of society. They saw the great trends of the 19th, 20th century seem to be, at least superficially, towards more and more centralization, great hierarchies, where the individual was losing his sense of individuality and his power to the state, both economic and political. So the anarchists were individualists, they were federalists in advocating a loose-knit, decentralized society. They were anti-statists, they were anti-militarists, passionately against warfare, preaching love and brotherhood rather than hatred and war.
Well, most of the people who founded the freie Arbeiterstimme were active in the freie Arbeiterstimme and supported it continuously until the very end, were people of the needle trades. The same people who were also active in organizing the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union, the millinery workers, the pocketbook workers, the furrier workers.